where we're looking at ecological stories around the UK. My name's Jo and I work for the Field Studies Council based at Flatford Mill in Suffolk, and I'm here in the local woodland to our centre. So the first thing I found when looking around this woodland is some interesting fungi, and you can see a couple of examples here. So fungi are different from other classifications of organisms. They are not plants or animals or bacteria. They're in their own kingdom, and they have more complex cells. So they have eukaryotic cells like animals and plants, rather than prokaryotic cells like bacteria. And they can be anything from microscopically small to some of the largest organisms on Earth, stretching for masses and masses of land area. It's estimated that there might be up to 1.5 million different species of fungi on Earth. So fungi, though, aren't always decomposers. Sometimes they actually form an association with other organisms in order to survive. And what I'm going to do now is introduce you to my lovely friend Dylan, who's going to tell us some more about that.
We're going to need to move from here, where we're sat in Grove Woods, in the east of England, just next to FSC Flatford Mill in Suffolk, and fly over the breadth of the UK to visit FSC Tollymore in Northern Ireland. Hi Dylan, how are you doing?
Hi Jo, I'm doing good and I hope you're doing well over there also. Those were some really good fungus facts. Now I'm hoping to wow you with some facts about lichens. So, what are lichens? Well, lichens, if there are two organisms living in symbiosis, our organisms are a fungus and an algae. Now, the fungus is the dominant partner in our lichens, and that's what gives it its structure, shape and its colour. While the algae, which can be a blue algae or a green algae, are known as cyanobacteria. And it's not too unusual for lichens to have both types of algae. Now, the way this relationship works is the fungus benefits off the photosynthetic properties of the algae. So the algae is able to capture sunlight and photosynthesize, while the fungus acts like a structural cup to capture water. And this relationship, as previously mentioned, allows our lichens to live in various environmental conditions. And you'll often find them in areas where other plants aren't growing, such as harsh rocky outcrops to built up city environments. Now, lichens are really beneficial for a lot of different reasons. One of those is the part they play in the food chain. Lichens can be eaten by slugs, snails, and also many small insects such as springtails, to larger mammals such as Arctic hares and reindeer. But also we don't have any of those mammals around here. They can also be used as a nest building material by birds. But even further than that, they're really beneficial to humans as well. They're really good at absorbing pollutants from the air, such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide and heavy metals. And they also act as environmental indicators. And in the case of lichens, they can actually tell us the condition of the air quality. So if you're walking around an area and you see lichens with nice leafy structures, that's generally an indication that the air is healthy. While if you're walking around an area and where we would expect to find lichens but you don't see any, you might start to question the quality of the air. So overall, lichens are something really interesting to learn a bit more about.
Thanks Dylan, that was really fascinating. So where do we go from here? Well, we've looked at microalgae in terms of its association with fungi, but some algae is much, much bigger and completely self-sufficient. So I'd like to fly up to Scotland now to visit my friend Christina on the Isle of Cambrai, so that she can show us some seaweed examples. Hey Christina, you look like you're having a lovely day at the beach.
Hi there Jo, it's great to speak to you. It's a nice crisp autumn day today, it's a little bit breezy. I'm here today to show you some of the incredible seaweed species that we have on this shore, but actually that exist across most shores across the UK. Macroalgae, or seaweed as we often refer to them, are really abundant across tidal zones in the UK and live under a really variable set of living conditions. Now the tide rises and falls twice a day, and this creates quite challenging conditions for the seaweed to survive in. At some periods of time the seaweed is covered by water, so it has to compete for light to photosynthesize, but at some times the seaweed is completely uncovered by the water and therefore it has to survive drying out. Now because of these changing conditions we have lots of different types of seaweed that have evolved because of these reasons, and the three main groups that we're going to look at, we have the red seaweeds, we have the brown seaweeds, and we also have the green. Green seaweeds are often really simple structures, sometimes only one cell in thickness. They also, like plants, possess the pigment called chlorophyll, which gives them the bright green colour, but it also helps them photosynthesize. Chlorophyll helps capture the energy from the light in the sun and converts it into food and energy for the plant or the algae to survive. Green seaweeds are often found at the top of the shore, sometimes floating free in rock pools, and this is a perfect example of one here. This is known as gutweed, and when you hold it up to the light you can see that bright green colour, and it's also really thin so you can sometimes see through it. So red and brown algae do also have chlorophyll and that helps them absorb that light, but because they live much further down the shore than the green seaweeds, they've also adapted to have accessory pigments, and that helps them access different wavelengths of light. Because they're covered by the sea more often than the seaweeds high up on the shore, it gives them that extra advantage for photosynthesis and getting energy. Some of them have even taken it that one step further, and quite often you'll find brown seaweeds that have air bladders, which almost act like armbands. It helps keep them afloat when the tide comes in and gives them more access to that light. So this is a perfect example of some air bladders here. This is a seaweed called eggrack, and you can see quite clearly these huge air bladders here, literally just like armbands. So as well as creating habitats on the shore, seaweed is also a really important source of food and energy for the rocky shore ecosystem. One of the many animals that feeds on seaweed on the rocky shore are periwinkles, and I have some lovely examples of a species known as a flat periwinkle just here. Hopefully you can see that. It's very well camouflaged, and this is what makes the flat periwinkle so interesting, is it has quite a few ingenious ways of hiding itself in its rocky shore habitat. Now as you can see, this is the periwinkle here. It's quite small, they tend to only be about a centimetre or so in height, and they're also very well rounded. They've got a flattened spire here, and this is to help make them look like the air bladders of the seaweed that they live and feed on. So that's one level of camouflage, but the second level is even more interesting. As a species, they are known to exhibit a type of adaptation called colour polymorphism, which effectively means even though they're the same species, they exhibit different colours, and they exhibit those different colours in their shells. It's kind of a little bit like with us as humans, and we have different hair colours, they exhibit different shell colours instead. And it's been shown that actually, depending on the shell colour that a snail has, it will spend most of its time, or it'll live on the seaweed that matches its colour better, and they will move around depending on the time of year and find the seaweed that matches up with their shell colour the best. So that's two ingenious ways of surviving on the rocky shore, where predators like birds, fish and crabs are pretty prevalent. So here are a few of the examples of the different colour morphs that you can get. We've obviously got a nice bright yellow, we have a dark brown, we have kind of an orange, but they also come in green, red and everything in between as well. The rocky shore is absolutely covered in molluscs, from mussels to oysters to limpets to periwinkles. Well, molluscs are an incredibly diverse group of animals that are found all over the world and have some truly incredible adaptations to survive.
You've looked at molluscs, however, not all molluscs we see are marine, and most of the ones that we know are fairly common and found around our gardens and local green spaces. So we're going to head now to North Wales up in Snowdonia to talk to my wonderful colleague Hanny, and she can tell us more. Hi Hanny.
Hello Joe, nice to hear from you. Yes, here we are at Rhydd Creau in the Snowdonia National Park in North Wales. And today I'm going to show you some really interesting snails which you've probably seen around before, but you might not have realised just how amazing these snails are. We're going to be looking at banded snails today. There's a selection here that we found in our garden in the grounds at Rhydd Creau this morning. These are small to medium-sized snails, and they're in the family Helicidae, and as you can see they come in a variety of different colours, and because of these often present bands around the shell they are referred to as banded snails, and there are 4 species of these in Central Europe, but today we're going to specifically look at the grove snail, which is Sepia nemoralis. As you can see, they come in different background shell colours, so they might be pink, they might be yellow, they might be brown, and they also come with different levels of banding. So they may be plain and have no banding at all, like this one. They may have a single band, like this one, or they may have multiple bands, like this one, unlike these guys that are trying to get away here. Contrary to all this variability, under anatomical examination, especially in the genital apparatus, it proves that it's always the same species despite these differences in appearances. But what genetics tells us is that actually the dominant colour is brown. Brown is dominant over pink, and pink is dominant over yellow. Genetics also tells us that the plain shell, or the non-banded shell, is dominant over a single band, and the single band is dominant over the multiple banding. So in theory what we should see is that the majority of snails are brown and non-banded. However, as you can see from the selection that we found this morning, that's not the case. There are other factors at play here, so ecology trumps genetics. And what's happening here is that it's the pressures of the predators that are affecting the markings of the shells of these snails. These, amongst many other small snail species in the UK, are being predated by birds, among them the song thrush, and these birds hunt by sight. So it's the snails that they can see easiest in the vegetation that they are catching and eating. Interestingly, the song thrush smashes the snail shell against a stone. It might be a stone like this one, a piece of wall, or it might just be a natural stone that's in the environment, and we call this a thrush anvil. So they smash the snail shell to get at the juicy contents inside, and you can spot these stones because they'll have a load of broken shells around them. And because vegetation in nature is so varied in colour, then there's always going to be some snails that are better camouflaged than others. What we find is that the dark snails tend to be better camouflaged on bare earth or where there's no vegetation. The yellow snails are better camouflaged in bright, open and grassy areas, and the pink and the banded snails are better camouflaged on branches and inside bushes. And obviously the better camouflage they are, then they are more likely to survive because they're not getting eaten by the birds. Therefore they can go on to reproduce and ensure the continuation of the species. So that's what explains the variation in the shell markings of these banded snails. And this is called polymorphism, when there's a variation in the appearance of the same species. So there you have it. Snails can be amazing too. I hope that was interesting, Joe. Bye!
Amazing, Hanny. That was so cool looking at the little snails. Thank you. Really interesting. So hopefully this nature conversation we've shown you some interesting species. We've shared some interesting facts and inspired you to get outside and start looking around at what wonders you can find in your local area. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye from the FSC.